The soul, I sing the mighty power of God that made the mountains rise, that spread the flowing seas abroad and built the lofty skies. I sing the wisdom that ordained the sun to rule the day. The moon shines full at his command, and all the stars obey. I sing the goodness of the Lord that filled the earth with food. He formed the creatures with his word, and then pronounced them good. Lord, how your wonders are displayed where'er I turn my eye. If I survey the ground I tread, or gaze upon the sky, in heaven he shines with beams of love, with wrath in hell beneath. It's on his earth I stand or move, and it's his air I breathe. His hand is my perpetual guard, he keeps me with his eye. Why should I then forget the Lord, who is forever nigh? Amen. Be seated, please. During the invitation, we'll sing a couple of stanzas from number 382.
Solomon was the greatest king the world had ever seen. The only one to rival him was, of course, our Lord Jesus Christ, who pronounced in Matthew 12 and verse 42 that the queen of the south would rise in judgment with that generation and condemn it because the queen of Sheba came to hear of the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, a greater than Solomon is here. People flocked to hear the wisdom of Solomon. You can read about it in the Kings, where they would come together to hear him, but yet Jesus, the greater than Solomon, was in their midst, and people did only criticize him. When you look at the life of Solomon, it is a life of splendor in so many different ways. His life is characterized, you remember, by extreme wealth. It was not because he asked for it, it was a byproduct of his first request of God. In 1 Kings chapter 3, as a very young king, God appeared to him in a dream and said, "Ask of me and I will give it to you." And he prayed for wisdom. And because he prayed for wisdom, God said, "I'm going to give you all the things for which you did not ask," and the implication is for which normal people would have asked. And wealth was one of the things that he gave him. His works were unparalleled. The building of the Temple of Solomon was absolutely phenomenal. 1 Kings chapter 6 and verse 7, the stones were hewed in such a way that as they were being put into place, there was not the sound of an axe heard, because there was nothing to be shaved from those stones that were quarried. They were that perfect. And so he was a genius when it came to that. His wisdom was unparalleled, the thing for which he asked God. And God told him in 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 12 that no one has arisen before you, and none will arise after you as wise as you are. Of course, Jesus was the only exception. His Achilles heel, if you want to call it that, was his relationship with women. Because he multiplied wives, 700 wives and 300 concubines, and they turned away his heart. Instead of, in marriage, when it is done the way God wants it, your spouse turns your heart toward God, Solomon's wives turned his heart away from God. And it ended up becoming a great downfall to him. He is known for his writings. The Proverbs, the majority of them, depending upon how you interpret some of the names that are given in the latter part of the book. 2 Psalms, Psalm 72, Psalm 127, the Song of Solomon, and then the book of Ecclesiastes, which is where we will study together this morning. Ecclesiastes, if I had to describe it this way, is basically, in the field of science, when you're growing and when you're seeking to study something, you will go through and you will perform the scientific experiment. You'll go through a number of different studies calculated throughout the time. And then at the end of your findings, you will publish what you have found in your research in some kind of an academic journal at the very minimum. The individuals who have sponsored you in your scientific research, you will have to produce the results for which they invested so much money. Now, Ecclesiastes is, in my judgment, the published results of a scientific experiment that Solomon endeavored in. Now, the scientific experiment, or when it comes to going through the scientific experiment, really a lot of things that are technical are really common sense and things that we take for granted, but we don't realize it. All right? The scientific method, to be exact, where you go through, and here's the technical leading, okay? You define the problem, you develop the criteria by which you will determine whether you have found the solution, you form the hypothesis, you perform the experiment, and then you accept or reject it. Now, most of us in school had to memorize that formula. Obviously, I still don't have it memorized because I had to look at it. Science was not a strong suit. Didn't make any sense to me. But when it comes to that, okay, we understand that formula, but you and I use that type of a reasoning every day, even if we don't think of it in those steps. For an example, if I come to you and I say, my car, or there is a car in the parking lot that will not start, that's a problem. Okay? And we already know how we can answer this problem correctly. That is, what defines success in this issue? To get the car started and to keep it running. Okay? We already understand that. That's implied in the statement of the problem. Now, we will all go through a different set. We will perform a different hypothesis. Why is it that the car isn't starting? Without having all the details, we might simply ask the first question, do they have the keys? Brooke's car is one where the keys have to be on you. You don't actually put them in the ignition. They just have to be in your pocket. And so sometimes I've gone to start the car and the keys aren't in the car or in my pocket, and so it won't start. It's not a major problem. Okay, if you've got the keys, then is there enough gas? We're just starting very broadly and we're working our way in, right? Then it might be something with the battery. We might look, there might be corrosion on the cables. We might need to pop the hood. There are a million different things that we would check. But what are we doing? We're inserting a hypothesis. Is it the keys? Is it the gas? Is it the battery? Is it this? Is it this? And based upon the results to those inquiries and those guesses, we are either accepting or rejecting the hypothesis that we have set forward, right? And thus we come to a conclusion when it is done that what was really wrong, and we will do this, we'll stand around and say, well, what was the issue with the car? How'd you get it running? Well, it was this. What are you doing? You're publishing your results. So, we go through this and we understand this. Now, Solomon was a scientist of the first order. His wisdom was more than just the application of knowledge. His wisdom was the multiplication of knowledge. The Bible describes in the Kings his wisdom, the breadth of his mind being as broad as the sand on the seashore. His mental capacity was unmatched, okay? And here's the thing you have to understand. Sometimes, and I've come to this conclusion, and I have friends who fit into this category, you can't, and this is one of the reasons why you can't measure yourself by the standards of other people. Because what you have to understand is that some people are operating with a different set of hardware upstairs than you are. Okay? It's neither good nor bad. It's just a statement of fact. Some people have an intellectual capacity to process information in a certain way. I have a friend that he can sit down at a text of Scripture and he can ascertain on his own analysis what it would take me reading 20 commentaries and compiling them together to be able to tell you. He's operating with a different mindset. His IQ is through the roof. His analytical skills are off the charts. Okay? And so you can't get upset about that. But you have these mental capacities. And Solomon had a huge mental capacity. His knowledge was so vast, the Bible will describe it this way. He could talk about the cedars in Lebanon, these large trees, and he could talk about the little hyssop, the little sprout that was growing out of a wall. His knowledge was so vast from the highest form of a tree to the lowest form, he understood it all in that area of, what is that, botany? Now, what Solomon is doing in Ecclesiastes is he is relating to us the experiment that he has used his life to perform. And the problem at hand that he is seeking to find the solution to is what is it that brings happiness or fulfillment in life? And throughout this book, he will talk to you about how he inserted a different hypothesis in that blank to say this produces happiness or fulfillment. And then you will see him reject that hypothesis and insert another, and insert another, and insert another, until finally, when you come to the end of the book, which is where we'll be studying, he will insert and show you the only thing that actually worked. Okay? For an example, look at some of the things that he inserted. Look at Ecclesiastes chapter 2, where he begins the process of inserting different ideas about what can bring happiness. Chapter 2, verse 1, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. That what brings happiness in life is just simply enjoying it to the nth degree. Don't withhold anything from yourself. Indulge in pleasure. Verse 2, I said to laughter, it is mad. And so I was going to be the life of the party. I was going to enjoy every party. And I was going to give my heart, number 3, to wine, because surely a liquid can bring you fulfillment in life, right? Or it can help you deal with the difficulties of life. Actually, it will not. There are a number of people in my extended family who have struggled with alcoholism. And I can tell you right now, that liquid will do nothing for you. It will do absolutely nothing for you. It will dull you momentarily to that problem. But the second you wake up, that problem will still be there, ready to attack you. And many times it will be increased because you've reduced your cognitive ability to handle that issue. It won't work. Solomon says it didn't work. That's one of the things he plugged in, and we'll see some of his conclusions here in a moment. Then in verse 4, here's another thing he plugged in. I made great works. Well, I'll tell you what, if I just invest myself in my work, get lost in my work, if I'm a success at work, that will bring happiness. Here's the thing. The majority of people who ran successful businesses in this nation, we can't even name 5% of them. Do you know that? We can't even name 5% of them. There are your major steel magnates like Vanderbilt and some of the others, Chase, some of the others that you could name, but you can't name that many of them. So he said, I'm going to build houses and plant vineyards, and I'm going to make elaborate gardens and build pools and forests for growing trees. And so that's going to be where it's found. We'll see his conclusion to that here in just a moment. Verse 7, he's going to say this, I bought male and female servants and slaves who were born in my house. I also had great possessions of herd and flocks. If I can accumulate and amass enough wealth, that will somehow bring me fulfillment and happiness. Here's the problem with amassing stuff. You think in your mind, I've got to have this, and once I have this, I'll be fulfilled until the next one comes along. In an age of technology, the second that you hold, the second that the latest technology rolls off the assembly line, it is considered in a way obsolete because there's something quickly coming behind it to take its place. So good luck keeping up with it. Possessions didn't work for him. Verse 10, he goes to describe it all like this. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. And Solomon had the ability to perform this experiment in a way that you and I will never be able to perform it. We could combine all of the wealth in this room, and it still would not be a drop in the bucket compared to the wealth that Solomon had. His resources, that's the thing too about this experiment, his resources were so vast that he is uniquely qualified, not just by the breadth of his mind, but by the depths of his pockets as well, allowed him to perform this experiment to a degree. Because some people could look at it and say, oh, but Solomon wasn't rich enough. You know, he didn't really get to that elite level, so that's why he wasn't really happy with possessions. What do you mean? Solomon is the elite level. He defines the elite level of wealth. So then he said this. I'm going to turn to something else, verse 12. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. I tell you what, if I can just be the smartest person in the room, if everybody comes to me looking for the answers, and this is what I say, listen, when it comes to being the smartest person in the room, if you're the smartest person in the room, you need to find a different room. Because you're not going to learn anything. You need to find a different room. And the sad reality is, if I'm the smartest person in the room, it may be because I'm the only person in the room. But he said, I'm going to invest in wisdom. I'll be the smartest guy that ever lived. Now watch his conclusion. So he's reasoning this out, verse 16, for of the wise and as of the fool there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that the days to come and they will all have been long forgotten. And how the wise dies just like the fool. Smartest person on the planet, the least intelligent person on the planet. What happens to both of them? This is Solomon's conclusion. They both die. Now listen to this strong conclusion. Verse 17. So I hated life. I hated it. Or in verse 18, he will begin it again as he's going to return to this theme of possessions. I hated all my toil in which I toiled under the sun. And he goes on to reason it out this way. He said, I'm going to spend my whole life accumulating wealth, and I'm going to pass it on to someone, and who knows whether the someone who's going to get all that money is going to be a wise son or a foolish one, and he can blow everything I've made in a matter of seconds. So I'm working my whole life, not enjoying my life, to accumulate wealth, to hand it over to someone who won't appreciate it and will just blow it. Surely that's where meaning is found, right? Listen, too many people throughout the ages have believed that they were the chosen ones. They were going to debunk Solomon's hypothesis. They were going to debunk his experiment and prove Solomon to be wrong, and every one of their lives ended in ruin. At some point, we're going to have to learn to listen to Solomon. We're going to have to learn it. Now, let me ask you this. Is there anything inherently wrong with pleasure? No. Is there anything inherently wrong with work? No. Is there anything inherently wrong with wisdom? No. God created all of them. It is when we give them undue attention and we make them the ultimate, that's where we get into trouble. You see, sometimes people believe that Satan's work is about getting us to do things that are inherently wrong. But that's only one side of his playbook. The other side is if he can get us to take things that are actually inherently good and get us to disproportionately give our attention to them, he still draws our attention away from God. So, let's look at his experiment quickly. As we see his findings, there are two things that he says to us. The first thing he tells us, as he is drawing this experiment down to a close, and he has gone through a number of different things in explaining it, we're going to back up to chapter 11 and verse 9, and then move into chapter 12. The first thing he's going to tell us through the midst of this is forsake yourself. If you're living for yourself, you're living a pointless life. Your life will never mean anything. So he says this, talking to the young man. He says, rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. Now, if you just stop reading there, what does it seem like Solomon is saying? Go live it up. Go do what you want to do. But he flips this over and shows us that this is really about a choice because there are consequences. He says, but know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. So we can choose to live how we want to live, but there are consequences to that. Now, sometimes we get uncomfortable when we discuss this truth. That is, you are free and I am free to do whatever we would like. God made us that way. You have the ability, and some people, when they sit through a study like this, can say, I'm not going to let some mid-30s balding guy tell me that I can't go out and do this. Hey, that's fine. It's your choice. You are free to choose that. You are free to walk away from God. That's your choice. But here's something we have to understand. You and I are free to choose which path we will follow. But you and I will never be free from the consequences of those choices. And so we can yell at the top of our lungs, no one is going to tell me what to do. I'm free to choose. You're right. You are free to choose. But you are not free from the consequences that will come from the choices that you make. And that is the first thing Solomon wants us to understand. We are never free from those consequences. So, this is his counsel to us as he develops this. His conclusion is this: therefore, verse 10, remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. Remove all of this. Quit trying to follow this path that I've talked about in this book, because it doesn't lead anywhere. When he says that youth and all these different things are vanity, he's not downplaying life. What he's saying is this: so many people spend their younger years running after things that they cannot catch. That's why he will say throughout, almost 30 times in the book of Ecclesiastes, vanity of vanities. The idea behind the Hebrew word of vanity is trying to catch the wind. And what he's going to help us see is that there is more to life than just those younger years. And if you spend your life in your younger years, and I'm not talking about, listen, this is not a teenager sermon. This is people in their 20s, and their 30s, and their 40s. If you spend all of your life running after these things, when the strength of your life begins to fade, you will have nothing to sustain you in that moment. So that's why he says, forsake yourself. If you live for yourself, you will die by yourself. Now, he moves and offers us the counsel, which is the second point of his hypothesis, and that is to follow God. Chapter 12 and verse 1, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Verse 2, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after the rain. So, let's back up and walk through what has just been said. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Pursue God now. So many people want to treat Christianity as if it's something for older people. It doesn't really have any relevance for us younger people. Can I tell you the amount of people in my family who told me I was crazy when I told them what I wanted to do the rest of my life? Who told me I should study the law or I should study medicine? First of all, they didn't know me. Studying medicine, I never would have made it out of freshman 101, whatever it was. Study these other things that will make you extremely successful. And my answer, even as a teenager, was define success for me. You're defining success because a culture may look at my occupation and find it respectable? The same culture that looks at certain individuals and their occupations and they take lives in the mother's womb and they consider that to be respectable? You want me to hang my opinion on what a society says? You'll never have to worry about money. Newsflash, I've never had to worry about money in preaching. Doesn't mean you're getting wealthy. Why is it that when people choose certain paths, we look at that as a waste? That somehow they're a disappointment in what they have chosen. Solomon said the greatest pursuit of your youth is found in the pursuit of the God who created you. Whatever your vocation may be, just make sure that you're pursuing God and not hanging yourself on your vocation. Do it in the period of your youth, he says. Why? Because in your youth, you're building a foundation that is going to carry you when all of your life begins to fail. When your physical life begins to fail, you're going to need something that can carry you. And your God is going to be the one who carries you. As a matter of fact, you'll come to understand that He's been the only one who has carried you all along. Now, He's going to explain the purpose, and I want you to watch the progression that He gives here. Verse 2, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. Those are two images. So when we look at the sun and the moon and the stars being darkened, that is, the more you progress in life, the more difficult life becomes. That's not a Debbie Downer statement. It just means life becomes more complex. You have more problems that develop, right? You're responsible for the lives of other people in your family. You're responsible for all different things, and problems seem to compound, or at least challenges compound. And so, everything that was so much simpler when you were young, life isn't that simple anymore. Or as he will say, when the clouds return after the rain, after that cloud has dropped all of the rain, they usually go away. But this text says the clouds return after the rain. You get through one set of problems only to have what happen? Here comes a new set. Now, he's going to explain in the following verses the deterioration of our physical bodies. In the day when the keepers of the house tremble. If you want to watch something good for your soul, go watch a bunch of 5-year-olds learn to play soccer. It's good for your soul. They do not understand, and rightly so. It's a normal human reaction. When something is hurled at you towards your face and towards your chest, what is your common normal human reaction? Put your hands up and stop it. Now, in soccer, they haven't learned yet that you're not supposed to do that. But why do you throw your hands up to stop something that's thrown at you? Because these are the keepers of your house. You shove things away that would bring harm to you. So the keepers of the house start trembling. As age comes, the steadiness of our hands began to disappear. When the strong men are bent, your legs that were once so strong and could hold you upright perfectly now have a bend to them. There's a lean. You can't stand up straight like you used to because your body is beginning to bow itself. When the grinders cease, because they are few, your grinders, your teeth you use to chew your food, you begin to lose your teeth over time. And those who look through the windows are dimmed. What do you use to look through the windows? Your eyes. Your eyesight is beginning to fail you. And you have to remember, this is a culture where you don't have modern advances in medicine where we can help people. But even our modern advances, when it comes to the eyes, there are still points where we can't help people. Then he says, verse 4, and when the doors of the streets are shut. This probably has a reference to the ears. Now let's watch this because he's going to explain this. He's going to actually explain something that's quite peculiar when you think about it. When the sound of grinding is low, that is, you can't hear very well. Okay? Now, I'm somewhat aging before my time because I don't hear very well. never really have. When they did those tests at school in audiology, at some point, I think I finally just said to one of them, just go ahead and send me to the nurse. I'm going to go there anyway. I'm going to have to take it in private. Let's just cut this out. Okay? But your hearing begins to cease. Now, I want you to watch the next side of this statement. But one rises up at the sound of a bird. Do you see how peculiar your hearing becomes? You can't hear. You couldn't hear if a dump truck drove through your living room. But you're trying to sleep and there's a bird outside and you can't get to sleep because it's annoying you. You can hear that. You can't hear the dump truck drive through your living room, but you can hear the little bird outside. Do you see how he's talking about that process by which the hearing begins to leave you? And the daughters of song are brought low. The voice is not the same. The strength is just not there anymore. They are afraid of what is high, the fear of falling. The terrors that are in the way, the fear of tripping, dark and dim spaces, are not something that they enjoy. The almond tree blossoms, talking about white hair, if you still have hair at that moment. When the grasshopper drags itself along or it becomes a burden, the grasshopper is just the smallest of an animal, but it becomes a burden. That is, you don't have that strength and longevity anymore where you used to be able to run wide open all day long. Now some of these smaller tasks that you used to do without thinking, by the time you're done with them, you got to sit down for a minute. And desire fails. You know, I used to wonder why. When my grandfather was dying in the hospital, and it wasn't anything major. He had emphysema and then got pneumonia. But I used to wonder why one night he sat up and looked at my dad and he said, "Son, I'm just tired." And my dad told him, "Well then, Daddy, just go to sleep. It's okay. Just go to sleep." That the desire to live is not the same as it was when you were so much younger. You become so exhausted and overwhelmed with life, you just get tired of fighting. Because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Before the silver cord is snapped and the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern. These are two pictures, obviously, of the cistern where you're drawing water from the well and a lamp on the inside of the house. The idea is that they both stop. The essence is, the picture of the lamp, the light of your life goes out. Your life is snuffed out. Or the wheel is broken. I think there may be some references here to your internal organs. The heart stops pumping. The wheel that you would use to crank and get the water up, it stops. And there are a lot of other details we could go through and a lot of different opinions, but we don't have the time for that this morning. And then it says, verse 7, "And the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it, because we're now dead." And it's going to happen to every one of us, should we live long enough. So, Solomon says this: there is a place that you need to live. He says this: "Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth." Because I knew this is how life happened, and I'm trying to impart my wisdom to you, I found it very important to pass this on to you. And in verse 11 he says this: "The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails that are firmly fixed, and are collected. So are the collected sayings given by the one shepherd." Now, two things he says here about wise words. Number one, they're like goads. You had the goad because it would teach the animal not to do what? To kick back, because it would prick their leg, and so they learned not to kick back. Here is the harsh reality. Wisdom is going to hurt us sometimes. It's going to hurt us, but always because we need to be corrected. Some people won't come to God and they won't spend their life pursuing God because they don't like being told they're wrong about anything. Solomon says you've got to get over that. You're going to get things wrong and you need to correct them. But those same words that will hurt you will be the same words upon which you can hang your life, because they're like a well-fastened nail in the wall. And if you put all of your life in a bag, so to speak, you could take that bag and you could hang it on that nail and it would stay in place. I promise you that if you build your life, if you hang your life on the Word of God, your life will always stay in place. But if you hang your life on anything else, it will collapse in your hands. I promise you that. It's not just me, it's God saying it. So he says, my son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there's no end, and much study is weariness to the flesh. So many times to find answers to problems we face, and as you know, I love books. It's never really been something that's been in question. But I have seen people willing to clean out a bookstore to find a solution to a problem that they've got sitting on their coffee table collecting dust, if they would just crack their Bible. So he says this. You want to be whole? You want to find perfection? Here it comes. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is, the ESV says, whole duty of man. The idea better translated is this is man's all, or this is the whole of man. When God created us, He created us with a God-sized whole. Man, by his nature, seeks eternity. This book even says that God placed eternity in our hearts. We seek something far beyond ourselves. And there is a God-sized hole, in that shape of that hole within us, there's only one thing that can fill that void. And that is the God who created it. And so all throughout this book, Solomon has been saying, in this hole I've got, this God-sized hole, I've tried to put possessions, I've tried to put work, I've tried to put pleasure, and it still is empty. But when I finally put God here, I stopped searching. That's why the old church leader, Augustine of Hippo, said in his Confessions, "You have made us for yourself, O God, and our hearts are always restless until they find their rest in you." People will never know the meaning of life until they allow God to take His place where He created it to be inserted. That's what Solomon is saying. It's not rocket science. It's not earth-shattering. It's just a simple, basic, biblical truth. Because God is going to bring us into judgment once again. And that's how He closes the book. So I want to close with this story. There was once an 18-year-old kid, and the night was his graduation ceremony. And his father sat him down before they left that night, and he said, "Son, I want to talk to you about your future." He said, "What are your plans?" "Well, Dad, I guess I'm going to graduation tonight, and then we're going to go do whatever it is they do, project graduation or something else." He said, "That's good. Then what?" He said, "Then I guess I'll work the summer, and then when time comes, I'll move into my dorm and start school." "Well, then what?" "Well, I guess, after 4 years, hopefully after 4 years, I'll be done. Graduate." "That's good. I'm proud of you for that." "Then what?" "I guess I'll get obviously going to try and get a job after that, and I don't know if I've found someone by that time, maybe I'll be getting married in that process as well." "That's good, son." "What are you going to do after that?" "Well, I guess I don't know, I may change jobs a few times. It's a little bit different now in the workforce. You can change jobs a few times. We'll have kids and get them in school okay, then what? Well, I guess we'll get them in school and get them graduated and get them off to college. Okay, then what? Well, I hope maybe maybe 10 after that, I'll hit a point where I can retire. That's a good plan. Financial discipline. Then what? Well, I guess my kids will be getting married and they'll be having their kids, and so I guess I'll get to be a granddad and do it that way and spend life with them. That's good, son. Then what? And about this time, this 18-year-old kid has started putting together what his dad is doing to him. And he starts to feel the weight of what his dad is doing to him. And he's got tears in his eyes, and he looks at his dad and he says, Dad, I guess after that, I'll die. His dad responded, That's right, son. And then what? Because in this whole scenario, you said nothing about God. Every one of us are headed in that direction. Whatever the next step for us, we need to follow it to the logical end and say, then what? Until we stand before God. And we need to make sure that we live in such a way that we are ready for the final, then what? Coming to know Christ, a penitent faith, confessing Him to be immersed in water for the forgiveness of your sins. Or as a New Testament Christian who has not been faithful, it's time. We confess our wrongs and He is more than happy and willing to take us. If we can help you this morning, let us know as we stand and sing this song.
Kneel at the cross, Christ will meet you there. He intercedes for you. Lift up your voice, leave with Him your care, and begin life anew. Kneel at the cross, leave every care. Kneel at the cross, Jesus will meet you there. Kneel at the cross, give your idols up, look unto realms above. Turn not again to life's sparkling cup, trust always in His love. Kneel at the cross, leave every care, kneel